I'm Susan Miller. Thank you for being with us. Even though the U.S. Supreme Court has stopped Texas from coming into Oklahoma to take water, there is still some support for the idea of selling water to Texas. Selling water is now big business in many states, and Oklahoma City has become the water broker for 14 other communities. With Texas out of the way for now, the battles over water in Oklahoma are now focused on urban versus rural and east versus west.
Water wars in Oklahoma are once again very local. With the U.S. Supreme Court ruling against Texas, it's back to the issues that have dogged the state for decades. Half of Oklahoma has lots of water, the other half has very little. And from the state's biggest cities to the smallest, water is still the key to continued growth.
Every city has to worry about where it's going to get its new water. Cities in Oklahoma can't grow unless they have water.
Water is also important for our future economic growth, and we have to make sure that we preserve that water for our state, that we get more of that water to western Oklahoma where it's desperately needed.
Lawmakers have struggled with the politics of water for decades, but little progress has been made to address the issues of the haves and the have-nots. While the Chickasaw and Choctaw nations fight Oklahoma City over Sardis Lake, southeastern Oklahoma residents are fighting with the state over the Arbuckle-Simpson aquifer, the amount of water there and how much is too much to take from it. For the last several months, the water war has focused on Canton Lake in western Oklahoma, where Oklahoma City pays $200,000 a year for water rights. When the city said its water supply lakes of Hefner and Overholser were too low and they needed more, the floodgates were opened and Canton lost 30,000 acre-feet of water. A third of that was lost to the bed of the North Canadian River in transit. But just weeks later, the rains came and did not stop until both of those lakes were full to the brim. So much so that the gates on the dam at Lake Overholser can no longer seal properly, and some of that precious resource is headed downstream and lost to thirsty metropolitan users forever. A situation that leaves people who live and work around Canton Lake frustrated.
The lake in itself has weathered the drought just fine, but Oklahoma City hasn't weathered the drought. So when you talk about the drought affecting Canton Lake, yes, it has, but it's an indirect effect through Oklahoma City.
Jeff Converse is president of the Canton Lake Association. He says the water Oklahoma City took turned out to be wasted.
Twice as much water let by the Overholser-Hefner complex as what they withdrew. The water that has gone by Lake Overholser is gone forever.
Algae blooms are beginning in Canton Lake and fish are dying. Water levels are so low that sandbars now appear in the middle of the lake where 10 feet of water used to be. John Stahl is Northwest Regional Fisheries Supervisor for the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation.
This has been my lake for 35 years, and it's kind of like a child. You really don't like to see it abused.
Stahl says Canton Lake is on the verge of becoming a toxic brew.
The lake is so shallow, Canton's very windswept. The nutrients are being pulled up by the bottom with the wave action. So those nutrients are combining with the algae and combining with sunshine, and we have the potential for a real mess of a fish kill. The only factor we're lacking so far is heat. If it gets to 110 and stays to 110, fish soup.
And with the summer months ahead, Stahl sees little chance that Canton Lake's prized walleyes will survive.
We did not stock any fish this year. Normally Canton gets 3.2 million walleye fry and about 72,000 hybrid fingerlings. You don't stock fish in this type of situation.
If a fish kill happens, Stahl says it will be a decade before the fish population can recover. And then there's the loss of tax dollars.
And since 1941, the ODWC has stocked $7.2 million worth of fish in Canton Lake. In 30 years, it came up to $600,000 labor invested in Canton.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has spent more than $10 million over the last several years for operations and maintenance at Canton Lake, which includes about $4 million to repair the campgrounds and RV park in the Canadian recreational area of the lake hit by a tornado in 2011. But the biggest expenditure on the lake is the Corps of Engineers emergency spillway. estimated to cost more than $200 million. An emergency spillway to protect Oklahoma City, an irony not lost on Canton residents like local business owner Alan Cox.
An emergency spillway just in case they can't let water out fast enough. If we get a big flood, it'll go around instead of going over the top of the dam. For a dry lake. Yeah.
Figures from the Oklahoma Water Resources Board show it is the state's metropolitan areas and the Panhandle that put the biggest demand on Oklahoma water. And that demand has been going up steadily, with no signs of leveling off. Even though metro areas are using more and more water, they are hardly the state's biggest users of water. That distinction falls to power generation, manufacturing and industry, oil and gas exploration, and irrigation. The Water Board has also identified 12 locations that have the biggest problems with water. But one area that is seen as a hotspot is in central Oklahoma, where Oklahoma City has now discovered what many other cities and states have found out. Water equals money, as 14 communities now buy their water from Oklahoma City. The lure of big bucks may also result in a new effort to work out a deal with Texas to sell them some of Oklahoma's so-called excess water.